What if a revolution wasn't won by the strongest army, but by the most stubborn idea? What if a scattered collection of farmers, merchants, and artisans could challenge the mightiest empire on earth, armed with little more than conviction and a belief in a future no one had ever dared to build? It's the mid-18th century. On the eastern coast of North America lie Great Britain's 13 colonies, a burgeoning society of nearly 2 million people, separated from their rulers by 3,000 miles of ocean. For generations, they had lived under a policy of salutary neglect, developing their own economies, their own governments, and a fiercely independent spirit. But the costly 7 Years' War changed everything. London, buried in debt, now looks to its American subjects to pay their share, and it is here, in the clash between imperial authority and colonial liberty, that the seeds of an unthinkable conflict are sown. The story begins not with a bang, but with a piece of paper. The end of the French and Indian War in 1763 left Britain in control of vast new territory, but to manage it, Parliament issued the Proclamation of 1763, forbidding settlement west of the Appalachians. To the colonists, it felt like a cage. Then came the taxes, the Sugar Act, the Currency Act, and in 1765, the one that truly lit the fuse, the Stamp Act, which demanded a tax on nearly every piece of printed paper. It wasn't the cost, it was the principle. A voice rose from Virginia, that of Patrick Henry, and a slogan echoed from Boston to Charleston: no taxation without representation. Resistance grew organized. Groups like the Sons of Liberty used intimidation and boycotts, forcing Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act but reassert its authority with the Declaratory Act. The calm was deceptive. The Townshend Acts of 1767 placed duties on everyday goods, and British troops sent to Boston to keep order only turned the city into a powder keg. On a frigid March evening in 1770, that powder keg exploded in the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 civilians and creating potent martyrs for the cause. Tensions simmered, then boiled over in 1773 with the Tea Act, a bailout for the East India Company that colonists saw as a Trojan horse for taxation. In December, the Boston Tea Party saw colonists dump 342 chests of tea into the harbor, an act of defiance that could not be ignored. Britain's response was the Intolerable Acts, a series of punitive laws that closed Boston's port and stripped Massachusetts of self-government. Instead of isolating the radicals, the acts united the colonies. In 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, issuing a Declaration of Rights and organizing a widespread boycott. The time for talk was running out. On the night of April 18, 1775, British troops marched from Boston to seize a colonial arms cache in Concord. Paul Revere and other writers sounded the alarm. The next morning, on Lexington Green, a shot rang out, the shot heard round the world, and the war began. The British faced withering fire from colonial militiamen all the way back to Boston, which was soon put under siege. In June, at the Battle of Bunker Hill, the colonists inflicted devastating casualties on the British, proving their resolve. The Second Continental Congress, now acting as a wartime government, appointed a Virginian planter named George Washington to command their new Continental Army. As 1776 dawned, Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense galvanized public opinion, making a powerful case for independence. On July 4, 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, a radical document that severed all ties with Britain and proclaimed the birth of the United States of America. But declaring independence was one thing, winning it was another. The British landed a massive force in New York, routing Washington's inexperienced army at the Battle of Long Island and forcing a desperate retreat across New Jersey. The cause seemed lost. But on a freezing Christmas night in 1776, Washington led his men across the icy Delaware River for a surprise attack, achieving a stunning victory at Trenton, followed by another at Princeton. These small victories were monumental for morale, saving the Revolution from collapse. The turning point of the entire war came in 1777. The British devised a complex plan to sever New England from the other colonies by sending an army under General John Burgoyne south from Canada to meet another force in Albany. But the plan unraveled. The main British army under General Howe, instead of moving north, captured the American capital of Philadelphia. Burgoyne, meanwhile, found himself isolated and harassed by American forces in the dense wilderness of upstate New York. At the Battle of Saratoga, American forces under Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold twice defeated Burgoyne's army, forcing him to surrender his entire command of over 6,000 men on October 17, 1777. This victory was monumental. It convinced France that the Americans could win, leading to a formal military alliance. French money, weapons, and, most critically, a powerful navy, now entered the war on the American side. While diplomats secured this alliance, Washington's army endured a brutal winter at Valley Forge, a crucible of suffering where a quarter of the soldiers died from disease and starvation. Yet, it was also where the army was reborn, drilled into a professional fighting force by the Prussian officer Baron von Steuben. With the French in the war, Britain shifted its strategy, focusing on the South where they believed Loyalist support was strong. They captured Savannah in 1778 and Charleston in 1780, inflicting the worst American defeat of the war. The conflict in the South devolved into a brutal, vicious civil war of raids and reprisals. But the British found the region impossible to pacify. American commanders like Nathanael Greene and Daniel Morgan waged a brilliant campaign of attrition, drawing the British commander, Lord Cornwallis, deep into the interior, winning key victories at Kings Mountain and Cowpens, and bleeding his army dry even in defeat at battles like Guilford Courthouse. Frustrated and exhausted, Cornwallis made a fateful decision in 1781. He marched his army north to Virginia, establishing a base at the coastal town of Yorktown, hoping to be resupplied by the Royal Navy. It was the mistake Washington had been waiting for. In a masterful display of coordination, Washington secretly marched his combined American and French army south from New York, while the French fleet under Admiral de Grasse sailed to the Chesapeake Bay, blockading the coast and cutting off Cornwallis's escape. Trapped on land and sea, Cornwallis was besieged and, on October 19, 1781, he surrendered his entire army. The victory at Yorktown shattered the British will to fight. The war was effectively over. The aftermath was the creation of a new world. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, formally recognized the independence of the United States. The new nation, governed initially by the weak Articles of Confederation, struggled 3 years of instability before creating the United States Constitution in 1787, a revolutionary framework for a government by the people. The American victory sent shockwaves across the globe, inspiring revolutions and movements for independence from France to Latin America. It was the first successful colonial uprising against a European power, proving that a nation could be founded not on the divine right of kings, but on the radical ideals of liberty, equality, and self-governance. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does whisper. Are we listening?